Welcome everybody to this evening's webinar. I was asked earlier in the week if I could talk about the changing weather and how that might change our feeding program. Now I know it's not straight up winter yet, but we always like to be ahead of the game. Okay, so we know that winter is coming. We're into fall now. My kids have told me we're in like the fifth day of fall or something. Um, so in order to understand how we can change the horse's feeding program or what we might need to address to fix imbalances, we need to, of course, always know what is normal. And for any of you that are regulars on my webinars, you've heard it over and over and over, the basics of the digestive system, but I really don't think that we can hear it too much. Every time you hear it, I think you pick up something new that you can use when you're talking to your customers. So we'll talk about basic of nutrition, forage, and this is really where um, there's a lot of changes right now. Pastures are changing just like they do in the spring. We're changing in the fall as well. Those cooler temperatures cause an increase of growth of those cool season pastures. So if your horse does have access to pasture, then that's something to be aware of. We also know that as we go into the cooler months, people might be riding a little less. And what we can do if we are, we've gone through the show season, we're not riding nearly as much as we were before. So how do we change the feed? There are certain things that we can decrease in the horse's diet, but other things that we cannot. We really don't want to decrease too significantly the vitamins and minerals. Most people, when they're decreasing their horse's feed to match their workload, we should be really just decreasing protein and energy. Um, and then, of course, I mentioned the fall pasture changes. So the horse is designed to eat a wide variety of different forages, nibbling, grazing constantly. So again, as the weather gets cooler and you're like, oh, I might want to put him in a stall a little more because it's really cold where I am and I know he'll like to be in a stall. Well, stalls are really convenience for us because horses in the wild didn't have stalls, and most horses actually would prefer to be out and wandering and grazing. So um, there is no better supplement than turnout, and it doesn't have to be on pasture, but just getting them out of a stall can decrease so much stress in a horse. They move while they're eating. They don't stand in the same place. Um, they actually are designed to eat lower quality forages, like lots of different, what we might consider woody, stemmy, forbs, grasses, weeds even. They would graze on those and eat a variety of different types of forages. And I have a lot of people will call me and say, I want to um, improve my horse's pasture. So what is the best grass species for me to grow? And oftentimes we're growing a what we call a monoculture, where there's just one type of grass. Um, and that's a really foreign. Horses would have eaten a variety of different fiber types. And what makes a plant strong, just like what makes a person or an animal strong, is their ability to consume and absorb and store energy. So a lot of our grasses that withstand trampling and the pressures of horses on them, or 365 days a year, are really, really good at storing energy. So that means they're high in sugars because that's the primary energy storage unit for pastures. So, horses weren't evolved to eat these lush pastures and a lot of grain that we're doing now. Most of the disorders that we see in horses are based on things that we do to them, right? We put them into our schedule, we put them in stalls, they are fed what we think they should be fed or what's available to us, not necessarily what they should be eating. So knowing all of this, knowing that, we're not going to tell people to stop putting their horses in stalls and we have to work in order to afford to feed these horses. We know that inherently based on these characteristics, we are causing the horse harm. Nutritionally, digestively, it's not the best scenario for the horse. But there are things that we can add to the diet that will help mediate some of these. So that's why I say every horse every day should eat the DDA. Why? Because it's going to help decrease acidity in the hindgut, which is caused by stress, which may be caused by the horse being stuck in a stall more than it needs to be, or the heavy exercise load, or the large grain meals that we're feeding it because it needs to do work at speed. We know that horses are susceptible to mold, which can come from anywhere, and the DDA has the mold inhibitor, the mycotoxin binder in it that's going to inhibit or bind up those bad things that come from some certain molds. It's got prebiotics and probiotics that are going to help feed all the good bugs in the horse's gut and replenish the good bugs that are also decreased when we stress the horse out. So, we consider these as the primary essential nutrients. Water, right? Water, it's not really a nutrient, but your horse is going to die without it. Carbohydrates, now that comes into two categories. We have non-structural carbohydrates, which is the energy storage unit, the sugars and starches. And then we also have fibrous carbohydrates, those structural carbohydrates, which your horse absolutely needs to eat. That's fiber. He has a very high fiber requirement or dry matter requirement, up to 2.5% of his body weight. So for a 1,000-pound horse, that's at least 25 pounds of fiber, dry matter per day that they require. Fats, protein, vitamins, and minerals. We at DAC can provide 4 out of these 5, 6 nutrients, right? Anybody can supply water. We don't really have a high carbohydrate product, but we have fats, proteins, vitamins, and minerals. We have 4 out of the 6 nutrients we cover with the DAC products. So the stomach is really small in relation to the rest of the digestive system, right? Because the horse is meant to be grazing and eating small meals frequently. If we cut a window in the stomach and let you look inside, there are 2 distinct regions. Down the bottom, it's actually dark pink tissue and it's protected by a slimy mucus coating. Up the top, it's light pink and there's no protection there. And the food comes in, down the throat, in the top, it plumps down into the bottom, and it goes out through the small intestine. And we know that these little cells down here in the protected region, they're secreting acid continually because that acid is breaking down the food. And remember, the horse is meant to be grazing continually, so that's why they're continually producing small amounts of acid. When we meal feed horses, either we feed them in the morning and the afternoon, and then they have long periods of time in between where they're not eating anything, that allows that acid to build up and get stronger and stronger. So things like the pre-buff, the cool gut, can help to buffer that stomach acid so that it never gets too strong. So again, if you know, look, I have to work, it's going to be a long time before I get back to feed the horses in the afternoon. I know he's going to run out of hay before I get back, but there's just nothing I can do about that. If you can add some alfalfa hay to the diet, that's good, or adding some pre-buff also to that feed prior to you knowing you're going to be away for a while, because that's going to help buffer that stomach acid. Some signs of ulcers, because that's probably the biggest issue we have in performance horses or exercising horses today. Well, they lose their appetite, they start to lose weight, behavioral changes. We had a what was seemingly a quiet horse, and now all of a sudden it seems like a moody mare, or it's bucking, it doesn't want to go forward, and everybody's asking me for a calming supplement when really 9 times out of 10 a horse changes its behavior as a pain response and not because it's just straight up crazy. So all of these things decrease their performance. If they're not comfortable, then they certainly won't want to perform for you. And if bad enough, we can have colic-like symptoms. Now, it's more common to see those colic-like symptoms if we have hindgut ulcers, but if they're bad enough in the front, we can see them. So you can see in the bottom of this picture, and the bottom here, this dark pink tissue, and then up the top, this light pink tissue, and right along that line is called the margo plicatus, and that's where we mainly see gastric ulcers. Over 90% of race horses and over 60% of pleasure riding horses, rare in horses at pasture. But then we move on to the small intestine. It's just like a big long garden hose. If you lay it down on the ground, it's about 70 feet long. I have carbohydrates at CHO. I've got a star beside it because the sugars and starches are meant to be digested here, right? And along with some protein and fat and vitamins and minerals. But reason why I have a star there is because remember I said there's two types of carbohydrates, the sugars and starches, which are increasing in our pastures right now. But then there's those fibrous carbohydrates as well. So the fibrous carbohydrates go to the hindgut of the horse, which is the next part. But we also have some fractions, like fructan, which is a type of non-structural sugary carbohydrate, and that's rapidly fermented in the hindgut, and that's where it's actually meant to be digested. And fructans are really high in cool season grasses, and when they rapidly ferment in the hindgut, they can cause gut upset, colic, excess gas. So we want to make sure that our sugars and starches are being digested here in the small intestine. Again, things to add to the diet. DDA, because we're going to make sure that it's increasing digestion of those grains. Cool gut. So the other thing that I've recently been researching is a lot of our pre and probiotics, our live bacteria, that when the horse eats these probiotics, these live bacteria, oftentimes most of our horses have really strong acid in the stomach. That's just the nature of how we manage them, they're meal fed, that kind of thing. And that strong acid in the stomach can just immediately kill those bugs, those good bugs that we're trying to get to the hindgut. So I am now of a mind that if a horse is not eating well, if we know they've got gastric ulcers and we're trying to add probiotics to the diet, so live bacteria to the diet to help with hindgut issues, that we definitely should be at first at least feeding alfalfa along with it to get some buffering, or the pre-buff with those probiotics in order to help the stomach acid be buffered, so that then when they eat the probiotic, the live bacteria, it's not immediately being killed, right? And it's able to actually make it to the hindgut. So here's where we look at the carbohydrate breakdown. So plant carbohydrates. I said we've got these non-structural carbohydrates, which is our energy storage unit, and then the structural carbohydrates. So that's straight up fiber. As the plant gets bigger and bigger and bigger and taller, more structural carbohydrate, more fiber, because it's like the exoskeleton, right? It holds the plant up. That soft, sweet, lush grass that you see in the spring and in early fall, it doesn't have much structural carbohydrate, right? Because it's floppy and soft. And if you chew on it, it's really sweet and full of moisture. Those non-structural carbohydrates, though, they can be broken down into water-soluble carbohydrates, ethanol-soluble carbohydrates, and starch. So really, I should show it a little differently, because the addition of ethanol-soluble carbohydrates and starch is what some people think non-structural carbohydrates is, but really ethanol-soluble carbohydrates is a subset of these water-soluble carbohydrates. So I mentioned the fructan, the ESC, you've maybe heard the term ESC plus fructan equals water-soluble, or WSC. I know it can get a little confusing, but anyway, when you want to calculate the non-structural carbohydrates and you're looking at a feed tag or you're looking at a hay report, you want to look at water-soluble carbohydrates and starch, because those two combined are non-structural carbohydrates. If you're just looking at this ESC, some people also call this just straight sugar, then it's not telling you the whole story. Anyone that wants the values on any of the DAC products, I can gladly give them, but you've got to realize that the smaller the quantity of that you're feeding, the less impact those sugars and starches actually have. So, you know, you might have a product that you're feeding 2 ounces a day of, and it's 50% sugars and starches. Well, you're still only feeding an ounce of actual sugar, um, versus you might be feeding 25 pounds of hay that is 6% sugars and starches, and in that you could be feeding 8, 9, 10 ounces of actual sugar. So um, all of the DAC products are relatively low. Most of them have non-existent sugars and starches. But again, any that have some, you're feeding such a small quantity that it doesn't make a difference. So any product in the DAC lineup can be fed to a horse with insulin resistance or metabolic issues. And it's not going to interfere with their glucose and insulin metabolism. Now, obviously, if the horse is fat, you don't want to add a lot of extra fat and make them fatter, like the bloom or the oil. But we also have the DAC metabolic, which helps those horses that are insulin resistant, that can't deal with those sugars and starches. It helps them clear those out of their bloodstream. It doesn't mean that you can then turn around and feed these horses oats and high sugar grains. It just means that they're better able to deal with the glucose that's in their system. Then we have the hindgut, the large intestine. It's the colon, the large colon, and the small colon. And this is really where any of our digestive gut health supplements need to end up, right? They need to be able to make it through the stomach and the small intestine environment and make it to the hindgut, because this is where all the bugs live. And so our pre and probiotic supplements are going to have to make it all the way back here. So they need to be able to get through that acidic environment and the enzymes in the small intestine. So back here, we're breaking down fiber, we're creating heat, we're absorbing moisture. So the DDA, the rescue aid, those kinds of the probiotic paste, they're all working all the way back here. We also, these microbes, when they are digesting fiber, they create what we now call postbiotics, but really they're just different metabolites. They're just different things that they create. So volatile fatty acids, B vitamins, vitamin K, these are all things that the bugs, when they're healthy in the horse's gut, they will actually create these. Biotin being a very common B vitamin that we supplement with a lot for hoof quality. If your horse has a healthy gut and a healthy population of bugs, they will make all of the biotin your horse needs. Now, it doesn't mean to say that adding extra can't help with hoof quality, but it's very rare for a horse to be deficient. It's also where we get water absorption. So this time of year, when we're thinking about the weather changing and it's getting cooler, and the horses are drinking a little less water, and we worry about impaction colic, right? Because maybe they're starting to get more, you're looking at feeding more hay, and they're less at pasture. So more hay, which is pretty much 90 to 95% dry matter and not a lot of moisture at all, plus the fact that it's getting cooler and they're drinking less water, means that we increase our risk for impaction colic. Now, we do know that they will usually drink, for every pound of hay you give them or fiber, they'll drink about a quarter to a half gallon. So any horse that's dehydrated, first thing I do is I make sure I give them fiber to eat. Wet beet pulp, for example, is great this time of year, especially if you know that you've had a horse that has had impaction colic. Some horses, you can set your clock on it. That every time, every year, this time of the year, they'll do it. They'll have a bout of impaction colic. And so wetting the feed, uh, adding a wet beet pulp mash every day, adding oil to the diet, using the DDA, all of those things will help decrease your risk for impaction colic. So I'm not ever going to guarantee that you can prevent colic, but to decrease your risk for colic, you want to make sure your horse has plenty of hay. As we go into the wintertime and we are eating less, or when, we'll eventually get to the wintertime, Maybe you're concerned about fall pastures and you've got a metabolic horse and you want to get them off. So they're eating more hay that you've got stored. How much does it mean? Well, they need to eat for a healthy horse. I want them to eat between 1.5 to 2.5% of their body weight. So 15 to 25 pounds for a 1,000-pound horse, up to about 35 pounds if we've got a hard keeper that we're trying to put more weight on, and if we have a fat horse that we're trying to lose weight, about 1.2% of their fat body weight, their overweight weight, will work out to be about 1.5% of their healthy, ideal goal body weight. But fiber is absolutely critical. We also need to work out how much we need to be storing and buying. If we don't have enough now, I think I worked it out. It's a little over a ton um, per horse over a 5-month period of hay that they need to eat when you're conservatively only giving them about 1.5% of their body weight. So if you got 10 horses in the barn, you need about 10 tons of hay. So just make sure that you're stockpiling enough hay. I mentioned fall is coming and we've got to be cautious, or well, actually in fall. One of the things that we've got to be very cautious about is that change from summer warm season grasses. So warm season grasses do not store energy primarily as sugar. They store it as starch and they don't store very much of it. So they're always pretty low in sugars and starches and pretty safe for horses. So if you've got a horse that's borderline metabolic, um, and can go out on pasture because they're not too morbidly obese, then the summertime you get away with it in the middle of summer, because those warm season grasses that are growing, they aren't very high in sugars. But when we're in the spring and the fall, those cooler temperatures encourage the growth of cool season grasses. They are exactly as the name suggests. So they grow more in the spring and the fall, and they don't grow much in the summer. And they do store their energy as sugar, and that is what these horses cannot be eating a lot of. So be cautious of that. But there are other things that affect the carbohydrate content of pastures. Is there enough soil fertility? If there's not enough nutrients in the soil, then the plant won't grow. And if the plant is not actively growing, it is still storing sugars. So if it's not actively growing, the sugar just stays in the grass and it just builds up and builds up and builds up. If it's a drought, i.e., it hasn't rained a lot, well, you think, oh, this grass will be safe. There's not a lot of it out there. It's not safe because it's not actively growing. But as long as the sun was shining during the day, it is accumulating sugar. So again, we worry about the sugars if there's not been enough moisture. Sunlight. If the sun isn't shining, then and it's an overcast day, we know that the sugars will be lower in the grass. Temperature overnight is when plants grow, right? During the day, they do this thing called photosynthesis and they accumulate energy, but at night they grow. But if it's too cold at night, like we're starting to get some cooler fall nights, if it goes below a certain temperature when the grass won't grow, then again, first thing in the morning, it's still full of sugar. So we need to be cautious of those things. Just know that actively growing grass is using its energy. And that's why we want to keep mowing the grass, because it keeps it actively growing. Once the grass gets taller, um, it slows down its growth. And so now we're just storing energy, and it'll end up going into seed head. But we want that grass to be actively growing because that means it's using the energy and then the horse can't actually get the energy out of it. After fall, winter's around the corner. And I know that some people really are concerned about, it's never a good hay year. Every year's a bad hay year, bad hay year. So storing enough hay, like I mentioned, over a little over a ton per horse. You got more horses than that. But that sometimes just isn't feasible. I don't have anywhere to store it. My hay guy didn't have enough. So you can use forage alternatives, what I call hay alternatives, like bagged hay products, bag forage products. know that they do eat those more quickly than long stem hay. So again, if you are going to be using these bagged hay products, then I would recommend that you use something like Cool Gut or the Pre-Buff daily as well to try and mitigate some of those um, effects of them eating their hay too quickly, like the buildup of acid in their stomach because they ate their forage pellets really quickly and now they're just standing around, the acid's building up. So, if we're not using a diet of primarily hay and that hay is not provided pretty much all day long, then we want to make sure that we're supporting any of the negatives that we're causing, like increasing the acidity because the horse isn't chewing all day long, producing saliva. So pre-buff in the diet daily or Cool Gut. So let's look at a diet like this. This is pretty common diet. We have a high fat and fiber type feed, hay, some oil, but then that's when the horse is during exercise, right? And so the first thing that people will do is, okay, well, he doesn't need the extra calories, so I took the oil away, and he doesn't need as much of the high fat, high fiber commercial feed. So I just significantly decreased the amount of that feed that he was getting. Now, the back of the bag said to meet all of his nutritional requirements, he needed 5 pounds a day. And now this person's doing 2 because he doesn't need all the extra calories and protein that he was getting. But you can see that he's also now not getting a lot of the vitamins and minerals. Sorry, it's probably cut off on the bottom of your screen. So adding in, okay, we don't need all the extra calories and protein, but how about we bump up the amount of grass hay and feed something like the DAC orange? We're not exercising him anymore over the winter time. So don't be afraid that you might just be decreasing your commercial grain by a few pounds, or you might be completely taking it out. To add in your DAC orange, maybe you don't do it. Maybe DAC Orange isn't part of your program through the main part of the show season because you're feeding plenty of a commercial grain. Then when you decrease that grain, certainly add it in. Don't be afraid to add it in. Or maybe you don't feed a commercial grain altogether and you're just doing something like alfalfa and oats and using DAC Orange. It's fine to maybe take out the alfalfa or take out the oats, but don't decrease the amount of DAC orange. So I mentioned that there are other options for hay, bagged hay products, whether it be like a branded forage pellet or a grass pellet or an alfalfa pellet or cubes or even rice bran or beet pulp can give you fiber in the diet. And just again, remember that when you're using these products, gradually introduce your horse to them. Some horses have a tendency to choke. Wet it, feed it every day. Don't just say, oh, I'm going to feed this once a week. I mean, I did go to a barn once, and I am not kidding you when she said, I don't believe that horses need to be fed every day. And so she had her kind of grain hay regime that she did. And on Friday, she didn't give them the grain. I can't really explain what somebody's logic would be for doing that, but horses are routine and they need to be fed the same thing every single day. Um, the other thing that I want to talk about now, because in the essence of being proactive, is body condition and body weight. If your horse is overweight, good time to start getting him to decrease some weight. But if he's underweight, you really need to start now to try and get some weight on him before it gets too cold. And then it's really about maintenance at that point. So you can estimate body weight by either putting them on a scale, which is not estimating, that is a true measurement of their weight, or if you don't have a scale, you can use a weight tape or this equation. So a weight tape, it works pretty good for a quarter horse type horse, or a horse that has a lot of barrel and not a lot of neck, right? And the reason why is that weight tape really only, if you look at a horse and you split him up into 4 legs, his barrel, and a neck, the weight tape really only takes into account his barrel. But if you use an equation like this, which is girth times length and divide it by 330, that also takes into account legs and neck. Now, if your horse has, there are some horses that have a giant neck and a tiny little body, or a tiny little body and a huge body and a tiny neck, then it can sometimes be a little out of proportion. That's why weight tapes are just a guide. But this equation can be a little bit more accurate than a weight tape. When we're body condition scoring a horse, because a body weight, whether you do it with a weight tape or you do it with a scale or you do it with the other equation, it doesn't give you an estimate of the horse's body fatness, right? Body condition. So if you were to body condition score a horse correctly, you'd look at all these different areas and give them a score from 1 to 9, and then you would average all those out. But we're not going to do that. But what I want you to do is make sure that you're taking into account all of these different areas. What I see a lot of people do is look at B and C. They look at the wither and the ribs, and they say that is dictating the whole horse. So oftentimes in older horses that don't have a lot of top line, we'll see B and C. I might give it a 4. But then we look at A and F over the crest and over the hindquarter, and I'm giving it a 7 because it's so fat there. And then I average it all out, and overall the horse is more like a 5. So make sure that we're looking at all different areas. A 1 is pretty easy to determine, right? Not only is he really thin and all his bones are protruding, but he's also going to be probably lethargic, not loving life, probably got some discharge out of his eyes and nose as well. A 2, he starts to pep up a little bit more coverage, but still, there's a U in front of the withers, all the bones are sticking out. A 3, we start to see more even coverage over the whole body, but still I can clearly see all the bones. A 4 is where it starts to get a little tricky, right? You might see in a racehorse that looks like this, or an endurance horse that looks like this, and that's peak racing condition. For a broodmare, though, or most of our, pleasure horses, this is way too thin. This is what you consider, this is ideal body condition. 5 is perfect. Smack bang in the middle, this is ideal, perfect body conditions. Some people, I'm sure, are saying, oh my gosh, it's too thin. It's too thin. And for those that are on the call, I know that have called in and can't see these pictures, I know this is hard for you, but a body condition score of 5, if I'm to describe it, I can't see any of his ribs. He's got an even coverage of skin, flesh over his whole body. But if I did touch him, it wouldn't be hard to press to feel the ribs or the bones. Unfortunately, I think we have an idea of what is an ideal body condition score, and it's much fatter than this, but this is perfect right here. 6, now I put this one because the big difference I see between this 5 and this 6 is more his phenotype. This is a quarter horse and the 5 was a thoroughbred, so it's just their shape is different. So make sure you're taking that into account as well. Just some horses have a different shape, but he's got more even coverage over his whole body. Then we get to a 7, an 8, and a 9, and we definitely have much rounder appearance. We don't see flesh covering bones, and so that we kind of can see the structure of the horse. Now we've just got a really round, roly-poly looking horse, and it just gets worse and worse. And then when we have a body condition score of 9, we have a huge crest. He's got fat. You can't really see his withers. You can't see where his tail head comes out. Behind his shoulder where you do up the girth is a big fat pad, and this is, again, really dangerous. So if we have that thin horse, excuse me, had to get a drink. If we have that thin horse and we want to gain a body condition score, say we're at a 4 and we want to get to a 5 before the winter starts, or a 3 and we want to get to a 4, That's usually about 45 to 50 pounds of gain that we need to put in that horse, and we can safely do that in about 2 months. Anybody who says, "Oh, I can put 100 pounds on your horse in 30 days," I mean, they're crazy. That's going to be really hard. It's going to cost you a lot, and it's going to be pretty dangerous. So we can safely do it in about 2 months. And we can look at the different ingredients, whether it be oats or high fat, high fiber commercial feed, or rice bran or beet pulp or alfalfa hay or oil. And you can see in that middle column, those numbers are the amount of energy per pound of each of those ingredients. So oats has 1.5 megacals of energy per pound. And you can see oil is 4.6. So it's 4 times as much calorie dense. So oil is the simplest, safest, easiest way to put weight on your horse. But in order to get that weight gain in the 2 months that we want, get that 40 to 50 pounds of gain, we have to do about 2 measuring cups of oil a day. Okay, over and above what you're feeding your horse now to maintain him. So when someone says, "Oh, oil doesn't work for my horse," and I ask her, "How much are you feeding?" "Oh, I was feeding 1 pump morning and night, so that's 2 pumps a day, which is 2 ounces." Right? Well, that'll make him shiny, but it'll do little else. So don't be afraid. Somebody wants to put weight on their horse. We're looking at 2 measuring cups a day. Let's break that up over 3 meals and let's gradually introduce that. So otherwise they'll get terrible diarrhea. But it's just so calorie dense. The other thing that's great about it, there's no sugar or starch. There's really nothing else in it other than fat. It's just straight up fat. That's all it's providing. Unlike something like oats, yeah, it's bringing calories, but those calories are coming from sugars and starches. The rice bran, it is higher. It's about 20% fat versus oil, 99% fat. But the rice bran still also has fiber and it has starch in it. Beet pulp, super highly digestible. I love it, but it's just not as calorie dense as these other ingredients, like oil. So you need to start now. You got 2 months to get that weight on them. So we want to make feeding changes gradually, whether your pastures are changing and we're slowly adapting them to the fall pastures, or we're changing them away from fall pasture to hay. Make those changes gradually. Give them DDA. If you weren't doing DDA before, 100% during any change, whether it be a seasonal change, a feeding change, make sure they're getting DDA. If they don't get it year round, at least make sure they're getting it when you're changing the diet or the season. Fat, easiest way to put weight on a horse. Sale, show prep, just put weight on an old horse before winter. That's the safest, easiest way to do it. And then one of the things to be careful of right now is this change in fall pasture, right? It is increasing in sugar content. So if you have horses that are not able to have that much sugar, the other thing is it's also mimicking a little bit that spring pasture, so it's also higher in moisture content as well. So you might notice your horse has a little bit more loose manure if they're eating fall pastures than they did before, because there's more moisture content in this pasture than there was before. So, oops. Ah, that's what I wanted. What's it gone? It's gone. There we go. Questions? You can unmute yourselves.